Just letting everybody know that we are recording this event. If nobody wants to be seen, I just suggest that turn off the video so that you don't feel that your face will be around the world, because we've got a lot of people that have come international who would like to take this back to their communities. So if everybody's okay, yeah, enjoy. And the reason why I felt it was so important to hear Melissa's voice, me and Marguerite last year, we attended one of the university presentations, and I was blown away because most of the time when I used to keep on speaking about autism in the Black community, I was made to look like I was being racist. And I tried to explain to people that I can't speak for everybody. I only can speak my experiences with my children, because 2 of them are autistic with ADHD and autism, where the youngest one has got epilepsy. So my argument for this is how we can move forward, how we can come together as a community, so that when we're speaking about the Black voice, we're not saying we want to be isolated. It's about making sure that our voices are being heard, whether it is a Black woman, a Black man, a Black mixed race person, because again, when you talk about dual heritage, the communities have got different challenges within their community. So it's about us all coming together and respecting what we hear today, and don't feel ashamed if you don't understand. Just ask questions, because that's where we're here to do. So thank you for joining, and I'll put it on to Marguerite, who basically will be co-hosting. I'll be in the background letting people in if they come in late. So thanks for joining.
Thanks, Venessa. So just to reiterate what Venessa said, so what Vanessa's going to do, she's going to mute everybody, and then when Melissa speaks, there'll be a space to have discussions and answer questions that you can ask those questions of Melissa, and then we'll just facilitate a discussion, then mute it again, so that it's just a bit controlled, so that Melissa doesn't get overwhelmed with the questions that are coming in. We want to reiterate from me and Venessa, this is about Melissa's voice and giving her the space to articulate and to present her journey as a Black autistic female, because we feel that the time is now for it to be heard. So with further ado, we're going to hand over. Melissa, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Over to Melissa. Thank you.
I was trying to eat a little bit of lunch before it started, and I'm always behind time-wise. I am absolutely atrocious with things like that. But welcome to my presentation. I will be making very little eye contact, and it's weird. Even though I only have to look into this dot on the laptop, I still struggle to do that. And it's one of my autistic traits that I'm getting better at embracing, because prior to knowing I was autistic, I would force myself to look at people, and it's really, really draining, and it's quite physically painful as well, I find. So I'll be making very little eye contact. It doesn't mean I'm not interested in you all and what I'm saying. It's just who I am. This is still quite new to me, so I will make mistakes sometimes when I say things, but just bear with me. I always encourage constructive criticism and feedback to kind of improve my knowledge of autism and, you know, the perspectives from other people. I always welcome that. So get started with my presentation. So it's the missing voices of the Black autistic, and I am the Black autistic in person who we're talking about today. So let's go. It's weird because I'm going from screen to screen and I find that quite difficult. Right, so I started MisTA a few years ago because my daughter, who is autistic, had a little boy in class who would repeatedly tell her that autism is a disease. And he not only told her, but he would tell another little boy in class. He would tell him the same thing. And my daughter got diagnosed at 6. So it was about when she was 7 years old, she kept being told she has a disease. And I realized that some parents lack the knowledge of what autism is. And so I decided, because I have previous experience at working in schools and experience in particular doing assemblies with small children, I thought it would be good for me to educate kids about autism, because I found with my children things like littering, smoking, alcohol, when they learn about things like that in school, they come home to their parents and educate their parents on it. So I thought actually it would be really good for me if I would be able to educate children who would then go on to educate their parents. So that's why I did it how I did it. So just trying to move this from one bit to another. So I also educate schools about Black British history. It's another one of my pet peeves, that our kids know very little about who we are as individuals in the UK. We're taught about Black history, and when they teach us about Black history, it's American history. So at my daughter's school, for Black History Month, they would learn about one person, and it would be a musician every year or a sports personality. And I have no issues with those people, but I need my children to understand that there is more to us than the tropes of being athletic and good at singing. And that's all the kids were really learning every year. And so I thought, actually, I need to educate the teachers about it. And so I started a workshop called Black History Month for White Teachers and Dummies. And the people leave the workshops feeling really uncomfortable, but that's what I kind of want to have happen. I want them to question themselves and what we're actually teaching the children. And I've had really very positive feedback from it. And so it's something I hope to roll out eventually nationwide. But first of all, just kind of get more schools within Sheffield engaged in it, because I'm in Sheffield within the UK. I want to empower the BAME, which stands for Black and Minority Ethnic Autistics, about autism. I want to empower them and give them the knowledge so that they have more self-awareness, so that they can live their lives how they want to. And I want to be able to help get rid of the stigmas around neurodiversities, not just within the community, but within, so not just within the Black and brown communities, but within the communities as a whole. I feel that there needs to be more education around BAME neurodiversity. I want to be able to lobby for culturally diverse diagnostic tools, because actually even some of the questions that I remember being asked and I was asked about my children, they were very Eurocentric, so they were very white. And I will go on later to explain what I mean by that. But I can see how people within the Black and ethnic minority communities, I can see how actually they can be missed in getting a diagnosis. And it's because of the lack of culture within the people who are doing the diagnosis and also the diagnostic tools. I want to be able to educate faith settings about autism, because I feel that when families get a diagnosis that their child is autistic, some families are really devastated by that. And at that time, they want to be able to go to their faith community and gain support. And lots of people aren't supported because, again, there's a lack of understanding and a lack of support within mosques and churches. And you know, I've heard some real horror stories about how children and families are treated. So actually, when those families need their faith most of all, they feel cast out, and then they feel they're on their own. And that's something I want to change. And I just really, for selfish reasons, I just want to ensure that everyone that I come into contact with and my kids come into contact with have a reasonable understanding of what autism is, so that I don't have to re-educate people all the time, so that my children are safe. So I want the bus driver to understand it. I want the person sweeping the road, the person who works in the local shop, to have an understanding of it. They don't have to know, like have a textbook understanding of it, but I want them to have an understanding that means that my children are going to feel integrated into the community. So that's really, really important to me. And I just put a few of the hashtags at the bottom of the page that you see used in Twitter a lot, with it from Black Autistics. Right. So this one is important because within the UK, we have lots of definitions when it comes to colour and race. And you can see if you're white, you fit into quite a small box. So within the UK, you know, if they want to know what ethnicity you are, and you have to tick. So if you're English, Welsh, Scottish, Northern Irish, British, Irish, Gypsy or Irish traveller, or any other white background, you tick white. And then you have this massive group of everybody else. So everybody who isn't white is classed as BAME, which is Black and Minority Ethnic. Or you have BAMER, which is Black and Minority Ethnic and Refugee. Or you have BME, which is Black Minority Ethnic. So way back when, as a Black person, we'd be called coloured, which was really, really offensive. And when I was younger, my cousins who are mixed race, you would use words like half caste. So they are things that are really offensive now and are no longer used in the UK. But I find this visual quite fascinating when we look at just how many ethnicities fit in the yellow circle. And we're classed as the minority. And actually it's quite a small elite group who are classed as white. And obviously their colour is white. But that's it, you're called white. Whereas someone like me, I'm called BAMER, BME, BAME. Nothing in that describes who I am as an individual. And I take great issue with that. And a lot of people within the BAME community takes great issue with that. So we've got a quote here, which I really like. And it says, personally, I have never referred to my ethnicity using BAME or BME, and I don't like it when they are used to describe me. Like many ethnic minorities, I proudly refer to my specific ethnic identity. My background is Indian. And so for me, my background is I'm Jamaican. I call myself Black, or I call myself Black British. When I was younger, I would be called Afro-Caribbean. We're still classed as Afro-Caribbean as well. But for me, when people ask me how I describe myself as Black. We, as a community, we use Asian a lot for some people, but actually Asian describes you if you're Chinese, if you're Japanese, if you're from India, if you're from Bangladesh, Pakistan. So for me to be talking about an autistic Asian's perspective, you know, how can I really do that? It's impossible for me to do because actually there's so many different communities and so many different lived experiences within their communities. Culturally, calling an Asian, you know, a Japanese person and a person from Bangladesh, culturally is incredibly different. But I find within organisations, they will say, oh, well, we've got somebody from an Asian background to talk. And I'm like, okay, but, you know, should a Japanese person be talking about a Bangladeshi person's lived experience? Isn't that absurd? And so for me, as a Black Jamaican who's born in the UK, can I really talk about the experience of a Black Ugandan who was born in Uganda, or a Black person born in America? But within organisations, they tick a box to say, well, we're diverse. We have somebody from the BME community, and they're going to get up and talk at this conference. But who is that person? Does that person have any experience of me as a Black individual? Well, actually, no, they very rarely do. And so that's one of the things that I want to stick with you today, that they're wanting us to fit into these small pockets, and it's impossible to do. Right, so something I always talk about is white privilege, and it makes people really, really uncomfortable. And I've generally gotten to the point where I don't care that you feel uncomfortable by it, because if you're willing to come on and argue with me about you're not privileged, have you taken the time to read up on it to see actually, are you privileged? So it was coined by somebody called Peggy McIntosh, and there isn't any date to when she coined it, but she's the person. And so she says, as a white person, I realised that I had been taught about racism as something that puts others at a disadvantage, but had not been taught not to see one of its correlate aspects, white privilege, which puts me at an advantage. I think whites are carefully taught not to recognise white privilege, as males are taught not to recognise male privilege. So I've begun an untutored way to ask what it is like to have white privilege. I've come to see white privilege as an invisible package of unearned assets that I can count on cashing in each day, but about which I was meant to remain oblivious. White privilege is like an invisible, weightless knapsack of special provisions: maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. And whenever I talk about white privilege on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, I will always have people pounce on me. And I won't call it dogpiling because it's not that, but I will have people who straight away come and say, well, I don't have white privilege, I'm working class, or, I'm unemployed, I don't have white privilege, I'm in the same situation as you. And it's not about your physical assets. That's not what white privilege is about. It's about invisible assets that you have without earning it, purely because of the way and the structures of the society we live in. So places like America, places like the UK, Canada, those places reek of white privilege. So I had to think of a way to explain it that would get people to understand it better. So this is the only way that I've been able to explain it. And I think in pictures. So a lot of times I can only explain things in pictures or by using imagery. I can't use big words. I don't do big words. They irritate me. I do pictures. So this is my picture of white privilege. And it's weird because I was looking for a little video clip of it today on YouTube, and then spent 3 hours on YouTube researching the Titanic. And it's one of my autistic things where I can't focus on one thing. My mind is constantly racing. And then I'm like, Melissa, you don't have time for this crap. You need to focus on your presentation that you've got today. So this is a picture from Titanic. And the woman in this, she doesn't have a name. She's just known as Irish Mummy. And she is the lowest of the low, class-wise, on the Titanic. And there's a scene where she has her 2 children and she's trying to get towards one of the lifeboats. And she's walking towards the stairs, I believe, and they turn her away. And she turns away and she goes back to her room, her very small room, and she lays on the bed with her children and she tells them a lovely Irish story, and the kids fall asleep before the inevitable is going to happen. And the way I explain white privilege is this. This is a woman who is white and her children are white and they have next to nothing, right? But had there been another boat that mysteriously appeared and they were able to get people from the lowest of the low from the, I think, I don't know if they're third passage or fourth passage, or third class, fourth class. Had they been able to find another boat, and had me and my two children been on the Titanic, and say I'm the same age as her and my children are the same age as her, we're in the same financial position, had we both gone towards the boat, they would have turned me away and taken her and her children. And that's the only way I can explain white privilege. It is something that is ingrained in society. It's structurally ingrained that we will always have less and be seen as less because of the colour of our skin. And that's what white privilege is. So it's not me, it's not us saying as black people, it's not us saying, oh, white people have got lots of money and they've got cars and we don't have anything and you've got everything. We're not saying that. All we're saying is if there was one boat left on the Titanic, one lifeboat left, actually me and my kids would have been turned away, and this woman who's got nothing, that would have been turned away prior to this, would have been allowed on that boat. And that is how I explain white privilege. And that might still make no sense to some people, but it's the only way I've been able to describe it. So what I do now in some of the presentations is I look at examples of white privilege and bias. But I'm going to leave that until later on for people to think about, okay? So we have something called a model of disability. We have various models of disability. One of the models, you have like a religious moral model, which is probably the oldest model of disability. And in that model, it's almost like you think of a place of worship or a charity where they are, the people within the charity and within the church are the saviors. They are there to save the disabled person. They are there to pray for the disabled person. They say, you know, the disabled person is a blessing, or they're being punished for something that their parent has done. So that is the moral religious model. Then you have something which is the one that I focus on most of all, which is the social model of disability. And the social model of disability basically says that actually the way the society and the community is set up puts me at a disadvantage. So if you think about somebody in a wheelchair, that person is classed as disabled. If they have to go to work in a building with 10 floors, so they have to catch a lift, they have to get on a lift, or I think you call it an elevator in America, that puts a person at a disadvantage who's in a wheelchair. Because if there is a fire, how is that person going to get out? That person has to rely on other people to be able to function. So the social model of disability is saying, actually, if the buildings had no lifts, there was just one floor, everything was at the level where a person in a wheelchair could reach the stuff, the doorways are wide enough so a wheelchair could go through without needing help from anybody, the doors are electric, so the doors just open. Actually, that person in that situation and in that setting is less disabled and can function more independently. So as an autistic individual, I support the social model of disability, which is saying I'm more disabled because of the way that society is set up. So if you think about a school, the bell in the school, the tannoy, is so loud. So for an autistic child, you know, they have a lot of sensory issues. So you'll see them covering their ears, which then can ruin their day. So they've had that pain or that experience, it can cause them to have a meltdown. So if they didn't have a tannoy, then that child in that situation is less disabled because they're not having to cope with that stress. When you think of fluorescent lighting, lots of autistic people struggle with that. So I find artificial lighting very painful. And I always describe it as it's almost like an ice pick. It's like I'm being stabbed at the back of my eye when fluorescent lighting's above me. So if in a school there isn't fluorescent lighting, then I, as a teacher, would be less disabled and would be able to function better. And so it's about creating a society where reasonable adjustments are put in place prior to an organisation or a building even opening, so that a person doesn't have to go in there and it be and struggle, because actually the setting is more autonomous for them. So it says here that the social model of disability, which sees disability as a social construct, denounces the medical model of disability. And the medical model of disability basically says, I'm the doctor, I know everything, there's something wrong with you, I need to fix you. That's what the medical model is basically saying. And actually, social models saying, actually, we don't need fixing. Organisations need fixing, buildings need fixing, we don't need fixing. And that ties into the critical race theory, which within the critical race theory, they condemn white supremacy. And white supremacy doesn't mean KKK Nazis. It's about white communities having the power. That's what supremacy basically means. So the critical race theory believes race is not biological or natural, it is socially created concept, with the majority, which in our situation is the white population, maintaining historical advantages and power over the minorities, which for us would be BAME, or for me would be black. I put these pictures at the top because these are the people who are the creators of the term autism, the diagnostic tools, the criteria, the requirements. These are the people who have written the key books. These are the people we follow when it comes to autism. And as you can see, every single one of them is white. The majority of them are male, but every single one of them is white. And so just like the population as a whole, the autism community has been created with white people in power. And I've said that the UK and EU laws and policies are biased against black people, much like criteria and diagnostic tools for autism, which was developed by white affluent doctors on a cohort of white middle-class patients. And the patients were mainly boys. The parents were mainly also scholars and took their children for diagnosis. They thought there was something wrong with their children. And the concept of autism was created. And actually since then, there's been very little change in people's perception of what autism is. We've had trends in things like Asperger's used to be something that we used as a term. So that's going out of trend. Within the autism community, we don't like to use terminology like low functioning and high functioning because we kind of find it elitist. And what we say is, actually, if somebody gets a diagnosis of low functioning autistic, very little is invested in them. There's a belief that they can't achieve. And then if you get given a diagnosis of high functioning autism or Asperger's, if you get that diagnosis, then people feel you don't struggle with anything at all, which is so far from the truth. So for me, I would have received a diagnosis of Asperger's, but when I was diagnosed a few years ago, they stopped using that term. So I was just given I was just told I'm autistic. And it's important for us as well to use first person terminology. So I don't say a person has autism. I don't have autism. It's, you know, I have a cold, or I have locks, or I have a handbag. That's something I can pick up and put down. Autism is part of my DNA. It runs through my veins. It's who I am. So I am autistic. I am Black. I am autistic. So it says as well that critical race theory focused their scholarship on demonstrating ways in which the legal institutions support the bias, and has since been used to critique all institutions where Black people are present, including educational organisations. Critical race theory brings a richness of explanation to the experience of Black autistics that other Western theories cannot. It helps to explain why they must manually override their internal compass and motherboard to protect themselves from external dangers. It also helps reaffirm the experiences shared of the wider BME communities, feeling voiceless before intersections. Sorry, I've got so many things on the screen to move around, so bear with me. So it's like when I talk about the word masking, if you think about a mask on somebody's face, when they have the mask on, they are pretending to be somebody else. And so it's something that is prevalent in the autism community, and they're finding that lots of people aren't being diagnosed because they mask their autisms, especially women. And so for me to have gone for 36, 37 years without a diagnosis shows that I mask my autism pretty well. Although I don't mask it as well now because I'm trying my hardest to mask less. And so it's me pretending I'm okay. It's me forcing myself to make eye contact. It's me interacting and talking in a way where people will think, well, you know, you don't look autistic, you don't sound autistic. And so you're masking your behaviors, you're masking your difficulties, you're masking your struggles, and you're masking so that you can be integrated into society and so that you can fit in. But actually in masking, you're really hindering yourself, you're really harming your body. So I suffer from depression. I have a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome because I masked for so many years and pretended that I was coping when I wasn't. I was a civil servant, so I worked in an open plan, noisy office with fluorescent lighting above my head for years. And it was almost like I was having a nervous breakdown. And I would go home and I would have to crawl up the stairs because I was in so much pain. And I would scream and shout at my children. I would take it out on my husband because I couldn't cope with the environment that I was forcing myself into every day to earn a living. And so I was masking at work and then releasing my stress at home. And masking is something my daughter is really, really good at. And so it means it was harder for her to get a diagnosis. But at school, I would explain it like a solar panel. And I said, if you think of a solar panel who, you know, stores all its energy, all the light energy all day and then releases it in the evenings, that was my daughter. So in school, she would cope very well. And when the bell went, by the time she came out of school into the playground for me to collect her, she was a different child. By the time we got into the car and was driving home, she was a different child, and there'd be a lot of screaming and shouting because she would have so much headache and stomach ache, because actually what she was doing all day in school was masking. I've also explained masking as when you think about a person who works in an office who's a smoker, a chain smoker. So they would ideally smoke, say, for example, 50 cigarettes a day, but they work in an office and they're only allowed 3 15-minute breaks. So actually, while they're at work, they have to hold it together. But once this day is over, as soon as they come out of work, they light a cigarette and then they chain smoke throughout the evening. And that's what masking is. You're holding it together until you're in a safe space where you can release it. So for me, when I was trying to get a diagnosis, because it's so important when you're getting a diagnosis, they really want the information from the school. You know, what is your child like at school? And so when they were filling in and making reports about my daughter, school reports would say, well, we've got no issues, we can't see any issues. And I'm saying, well, no, you know, it's really difficult at home for her, she's really, really struggling. And so it almost seemed like I was lying. And I think the only thing that made the school believe me is because my son is also autistic, and they can see how good a mum I was with him. So my son would have outbursts at school, and was fine at home. And so they saw how I interacted with him, they saw how hard I worked with him. So actually they trusted and believed what I was saying about my daughter. But if my daughter was my first child and I was trying to say to them at school, well, you know, she's wrecking her bedroom, she's screaming and shouting in the car, she's physically pulling out clumps of her hair, the school would automatically think I'm lying. And what I find as well is when a child is masking and say they're having violent outbursts at home, schools automatically think the problem's at home. And actually what we need to educate schools about is when a child isn't coping at school with these children that mass, when the child isn't coping at school, they don't trust school, they don't trust the people to show them I'm not coping. But as her mom, my daughter trusted me enough to show me. And so the problems at school, so things need to be put in place at school to support her so that she can be happier at home. And so, yeah. So this is looking at the Black autistic and critical race theory. And we've seen these pictures going around, you know, about showing you kind of different perspectives. And I thought, right, I will make one for what I perceive and what the Black community perceive is going on. So right now, the male autistic still has the biggest voice within the community. And that is because the cohort of people who the diagnostic tools were created around were male boys, and they were white male boys. So actually the male autistic man still has the most dominant voice in the community. Well, actually that's not true, because I find the autistic parent, the parent of the autistic still has the biggest voice. So you have the doctors, then the parent of the autistic, and then when they start thinking, actually, no, we need to hear people's voices, we need to hear about lived experiences, predominantly it's the white autistic male who they go to. Then what started to happen was white female autistics said, well, wait a minute, this isn't right, you know, this is sexist. We have a voice as well, and we deserve to be heard. And so rightfully so, they got more vocal and started to get a seat at the table. And when I say seat at the table, I mean they started to get a voice and started to be heard and taken seriously. Just like the picture I showed you at the beginning about the different ethnicities and what you're classed as, and how a person would say, oh, well, we've got somebody to talk from the BME community. The same thing happens at conferences and within workshops. People have this mentality of, well, we've got a female and a male autistic perspective for this. So, you know, we've covered all our bases, we've ticked boxes. But actually they've gotten a white man and a white woman, and they've become the faces of autism, so they talk on behalf of the autistic community. And then you have the Black autistic, and I may have to change it because it's not just Black, it's BAME as well, but you've got the Black autistic who, you know, we're seeing practically nothing, we're getting nothing. So then when you look at the equity, this is how ideally how it should be. And it's the whole white privilege thing where they say, well, actually, I'm white and autistic, so I'm disadvantaged, I've got it hard. And we're saying, actually, that's not the case, because we are so much further behind through no fault of our own. So in the picture, you can see, actually, we need 2 boxes to make us equal to the woman who needs 1 box, which will then make it equal to the man who doesn't need it at all. So this is what ideally should be happening. And then you see the reality. And the reality is the male white man's voice is so much further ahead. The white female voice, you know, they're still getting the invitation, they're still being heard. And what I'm seeing recently is more and more white autistic women are being heard and taken seriously. And then the reality is, as a Black person, we're so far behind. And I see it in my studying, I see it in conferences. There isn't one conference I've been to where I've seen an autistic person get up and speak. Why? How is that possible in society right now? How can it be that we have no Black autistic people doing workshops and talking at conferences? These are conferences where there's lots of scholars, there are lots of professionals who are there, they pay a lot of money so that they can hear the voices of autistic people, but they're not hearing any Black or brown voices, they're only hearing white voices. You know, how is that possible? How can people honestly say there isn't white privilege? So, Carl Cameron sees the autism movement as a civil rights act of resistance, stating, "We mask to keep ourselves safe and to make non-autistic people feel comfortable. So stop masking, stop making them feel comfortable. Show them what it is to be autistic, literally flap in their faces and be proud of it." So for me, this statement really does reek of white privilege, because as a mum to a Black autistic 15-year-old, I could not let my son be flapping in the city centre. My son feels the safest when he has his hoodie on. He has it up and pulled tight. He has his headphones on, and that's when he feels comfortable. As a parent, I can't let my son go into shops with a hoodie on as a Black boy, because there is the stigma, there is racial bias, there's racism. So I cannot do that to my son. My son would end up being harmed. That's what I need people to understand when they talk about taking masks off. Be exactly who you are. Us as Black autistics, we don't have that privilege. I cannot be exactly who I am. So I continue to injure myself, because if I were to have a meltdown, or my son were to have a meltdown in a crowd, it's gonna go really, really bad. White people tend to feel unsafe around Black people. And so it will very quickly evolve into something where police are contacted and my son's harmed. And so it's important for me to always remember that although people say we're in this together, we're really not, until the white communities understand that we are, as Black communities, as brown communities, we are seen in a negative way. We are seen as being aggressive. Until things like that are acknowledged, my son cannot be exactly who he needs to be to feel happy and free. Yeah. And so I have to teach my son strategies to prevent him doing certain things just to keep him safe. And I shouldn't have to do that as a parent. I want my children to be well. I can see what masking has done to my health. Yet I'm having to teach my son to mask to appease white spaces. And that's really, really hard for me to say, to admit to be honest about. But my priority has to be keeping my son alive and keeping my son out of prison. So in order to do that, my son has to mask who he is, and it's wrong. This came on Twitter, this was like last year, and you can see, so somebody put up, can anyone help? My son has been threatened with tasers by the police twice this week and searched. He's autistic, and I wondered if there is a card he can carry with him so police don't end up hurting him. And what happens is what always happens. And it's weird, I always talk about I should make bingo, I should make a white privilege bingo, because there are times where certain things are going to happen and certain things are going to be said. And straight away people came on and people started to say, well, if he's got nothing to hide, you know, you don't have to worry because he's got nothing to hide. And, you know, we'll let him just explain to the police. And so it was white people saying things like this. And it was almost like there's an unwillingness for them to acknowledge the things that can happen to our black children, or especially our black men who are autistic. They will be harmed if they start to melt down, or if they try to run from the police, or if they become nonverbal. My son is somebody who, if something like that was to happen to him, like police were to approach him, he would lose his words. And he may try and run because he would feel scared. But they would just see an almost 6 foot black boy who's running from them or who looks menacing, and they would hurt him. And so we had loads of people coming on saying, well, if the boy's got nothing to hide, he shouldn't be worried. You know, just let the police search him. And I found it ironic with COVID. The police obviously got powers to go and question people who were out and about, because, you know, you're supposed to be in your home self-isolating, you're not allowed to go certain places, and you're only allowed to go out once. And I saw so many white people coming on Twitter angry because they said, the police have come and asked me, what am I doing walking on the street? How dare they? Or the police came up to my car because I was I was getting out of the car to go to the park, and the police told me I had to go home. How dare they? And I found it hilarious how angry these people got during a pandemic where, you know, there's this virus going around that are killing us, and we're being asked to stay at home, and the police have been given powers to question people. And how quickly people got angry and said, actually, you know, people on the radio, and they were saying, well, I argued with the police and I told him he has no right to ask me them questions, and I walked away from him. And I thought, oh my God, could you imagine a black boy trying to do something like that? It would end really, really badly. And black people on Twitter were very quickly saying to them, well, you know, answer the police's questions if you've got nothing to hide. And it was the first time where we saw the tables turn. And for a moment, white people experienced what it was like to be a black person being questioned by the police. And they took great offense to it because they didn't see themselves as criminals or doing anything wrong. They didn't look like criminals, so why was the police questioning them? Well, that's what we feel like as black people. And to the autistic person who may act differently to what is typical, you know, what happens to those children and those adults when they're questioned by the police? So we have to mask. We have to pretend to be somebody and something we're not to get by in society until we can be at home and until we can close the door. And that's when we can release it. But it has a detrimental effect on our physical, spiritual, and emotional well-beings. Right, this is masking. And what I've coined something. I don't know if you have to trademark stuff or anything. I don't understand all of this, but I've coined something called the triple mask. And so as a Black autistic, they have to mask their Blackness in white spaces. So we have to act in a way that doesn't offend the majority community. So for instance, that's like when you're in a shop, you have to act a certain way so that you don't offend or scare. So yeah, they mask in white spaces. They also have to mask their autism in autistic spaces because they are predominantly white spaces too. So I am at university. There are a few autistic people in there apart from me. I'm the only Black one. So my experience is very different. So I'm still not in a space where I can be myself. And even when I go to places where there are a lot of autistic people there, if I'm the only Black autistic, I still can't be myself because it's still not a safe space, because even though it's autistic people in there, they've still grown up as white, so they still have those privileges. And so a third one is Black autistics mask their autism in Black spaces because there's little understanding of autistic behaviours. Black autistics have freedoms in little to no spaces where they are not under threat of incarceration. I can't see the bottom line purely because there's stuff there. I can just see the words and emotional assault. And so that third one is an important one because the community knows very little about autism. What we find happens is if a child's having a meltdown, a Black child's having a meltdown in a Black space, there are lots of comments about parenting and how you should, you know, slap the child, punish the child. You can't let the child disrespect you like that. They want you to be disciplinarians to the child. There's an expectation that your child has to act a certain way. And because the community doesn't understand the way the child's behaving, you look down on. So your community gets smaller. Even though you're Black, your community gets smaller because you cannot be around other Black families because your child is acting in a way that isn't typical to the rest of the community. And so we see it on social media a lot where somebody will tape a Black child having a meltdown. I can see it's a meltdown, but they see it as the child's being disrespectful. And you'll have reams upon reams of comments about how rude the child is and how the parent needs to discipline that child. And you see parents saying, I would rather die than have my child act like that in public. And so what those parents are saying is, the opinions of people around me are more important than actually what's happening to my child. And if people just took the time to understand their child better, then they would understand you don't need to punish your child. You know, there are strategies you can put in place, but punishment isn't necessary. Last year, I went to the hairdressers and there was a woman next to me with her little boy. I think it was about 4 or 5, and his behaviours were very autistic and he was non-verbal. And so I said to this mum, I said, is your son autistic? And she said, no. And I was like, oh, right. I says, has school mentioned the word autism or anything? She says, oh, no, he's not autistic. He's just, he's late to talk. And so I asked her if in her community there's a stigma to autism. And she says, oh, no, there isn't a stigma. But in that very brief conversation, I could see that she didn't want to even broach the discussion. She didn't want to even think perhaps this could be the label that my child should have for his behaviour. And I see that a lot. There is far too much shame and embarrassment within the Black community when their children are acting in a way that is perceived to be disrespectful. And actually what is happening is children are being punished and children are being left feeling worthless when they shouldn't. It's just that these children have a neuro disability and they need to be supported. So this is the triple mask, and basically what I'm saying here is the environment we're in, if that is for instance, a white space, our autism and our race will then trigger either voluntary or involuntary delayed responses. So a person who is masking because they don't feel safe in the white space because of their race. And so actually I have to mask who I am to be safe. And so the responses will come later when I'm at home by myself. So when I'm at home with my husband and my 2 children, then I can be myself. I cannot be myself in spaces outside of my home. My son can't be himself in spaces outside of his home to keep him safe. The same goes for my daughter. My priority as a parent has to be about keeping them safe. It's not about me being embarrassed about their behaviours. It's about me having to keep them safe. And so I have to have lots of in-depth discussions with them. And I have to constantly be telling them, you know, Mummy loves you very much. Mummy isn't ashamed of who you are. I'm not ashamed of what you do and how you do it. I'm not ashamed. I'm very proud of you. But to keep you safe, some people don't understand autism. And so and because they don't understand it, they're going to think certain things, negative things about you. And so what we have to do is when we're in those spaces, you know, you're going to have to keep your hood off. You can't stim. So stimming is a way a person copes. So a person might stim because they're happy or they're stressed. There's lots of different reasons for somebody stimming, but you know, I try and say to my children, we can't stim in public places because it will draw attention to you. And it was only a few months ago I dropped my daughter to school and I was driving home and I saw a Black girl stimming. She was about 18 and she was running vigorously up and down the road. And people were looking and laughing and staring, and I stopped the car and spoke to her and made sure she was safe and made sure she got on her bus and made sure I contacted the organisation she was going to, because I understood how dangerous it could be for her in that situation. And I wouldn't be able to live with myself had something happened to her. I've also been in a situation where I've been driving to work on a Sunday morning and there was a little Black girl stood in the middle of the road in her pyjamas and the cars just carried on driving. And I stopped. There was another woman who stopped as well. And we had to hold this little girl very tightly. She was non-verbal. And I've never been scratched and bitten so much in my life, but I had to hold on to this little girl because she had no concept of danger. And people were just driving past, and we called the police, and her brother came out, and I had to explain to her brother that I do understand, I'm not judging your family, but I have to phone the police and I can't let your sister go with you until the police comes, just to make sure everything's okay. And they explained that she'd opened the door and she'd gotten out. And it wasn't until the police took her and I got in my car and I just sat and cried, because anything could have happened to her. But what hurt more was the cars were just driving past this little girl. And the girl, I think she was 6 years old, and cars were driving past her and she was in her pajamas. it was a white woman that was holding her. So you've got this black girl, you've got a white woman holding her, she's in her pajamas, and cars are just driving past and thinking, nobody questioned her. Nobody thought, who is this woman? Who is this child? Why is the child barefoot in pajamas? People just drove past, and we cannot afford to do that. So we have to, as a Black community, understand what these behaviours are. You know, we have to stop judging and start supporting. So you've got the double, triple consciousness. So when I represent the Black racialized community, I must meet the standards and values that racializing white majority accept and will accept. This social relationship leads to a unique phenomenological position for racialized individuals, which is a double consciousness, which I've not coined that, that's W.E.B. Du Bois, who talks about the double consciousness. Seeing and looking through the veil and generating two selves for Black individuals, a sense of two-ness, endowing them with a second sight. And so it's like I have to conform, and I have to behave in a certain way that is acceptable, and I have to be aware of that, and I am aware of that. And it's things like that, it's the masking that's making me so ill. And like I said, I mask less, but it is still very, very difficult for me, and I don't want to have my children mask until they're older. I want, you know, they've been diagnosed early. I didn't think it was early at the time, but they've had her early diagnosis. And so it's really important for me to ensure that this society changes so my children don't have to mask as much as they are. I don't want them to feel there's anything wrong with them. I don't want it to infect on them, their mental health and their physical health. So yeah, I have fantastic white people in my life, and I call them my allies. And they, you know, one of them is, she's been my best friend since I started college. I've met parents along the way who are like family, and they really want to understand, and they are brave enough to admit when they don't understand something. They are willing to ask questions. They are willing to be told they're wrong about something, and that's what's important. Coming and arguing with me and telling me you don't have white privilege isn't going to change the fact that you have white privilege. You being able to even come and argue with me about white privilege is another example of white privilege. And I kind of need the white community to understand that. And so I've got just two examples here. You know, the diagnostic tools are Eurocentric. So what the white community could do would be to help me lobby for less biased tools. You could do that instead of saying, well, it's hard for everybody to get a diagnosis. My son had to wait X amount of years and we really struggled. Yeah, that might be true, and that is very true. It is hard for people to get a diagnosis. But when you look at the percentages of Black people and of Asian people getting diagnoses, it's significantly less than the white community. And it doesn't mean there are less autistic people within our community, it just means we're not getting diagnosed. And the later we're diagnosed, the less support we have, the more difficult life is, the outcomes are less. So help us to get earlier diagnosis, help us to lobby. Autism theorists are all white. So start supporting people within the BAME community getting training. Start speaking up at conferences. You get up at a conference and say, why isn't there any people from the BAME community talking? Why isn't there people with lived experiences talking about their perspective? Surely it must be different to white. If you as the white community got up and spoke more, there would be greater change quicker, because it doesn't matter how articulate I am, and I know I'm very articulate. It doesn't matter how articulate I am. I'm one person, and you know, one white person is probably equivalent to 5 or 6 black people. So if we had 5 white people getting up and supporting us, that would bring about a lot of positive change. But there feels like there's like an unwillingness, like almost like if I admit something's wrong, I'm saying I'm racist as well, or I'm prejudiced as well. Well, no, we're not saying that. We're saying we need change, and we're saying support us to do it, do better. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about allies. So I have allies who support me. You know, I've had people who have supported me to get Steve Silverman, who he wrote Neurotribes, to, you know, I was able to interview him in Sheffield. I was able to have a 2-hour sit down with him. It was amazing. And that's something I can put on my CV. It's something that Steve as well said he thoroughly enjoyed. It showed what I was capable of doing, but I wouldn't have been able to do it on my own. And the white people who are close to me understood I would be good at the interview. So they helped me push to get that done. So that's what we need. We need you to use your strengths and use your voice, use your pen to support us, to further us, so that we can further our community. Conclusion time. So I'm saying that my experiential knowledge, and I'll admit to you, I wrote this like last year. I can no longer remember what experiential means. Sometimes I find these amazing words, I read up on it, I'm like, yes, that is the word I need. 2 minutes later, I can't remember what it means. But I'm saying basically that my knowledge and my lived experience as a Black person, growing up in this Western society, has given me countless experiences of white fragility. I've seen people break down when you start to question them. It's something that a lot of people can't cope with. You have people who are really honest and kind of want to do better, want to be educated, but the thing I've experienced most of all is people wanting to argue back instead of being willing to listen. So I've experienced a lot of white fragility. When one tries to have an honest dialogue about race, naively I thought the autism community would be more sympathetic to the intersections of Black disabled people. Unfortunately, I am witnessing the same hierarchical, oh God, can't say the word, pecking order of white voices intrinsically unable to relinquish power for the bigger cause. And for me, the bigger cause, if we're talking about equality, well, then we have to be making sure that at conferences, that there are Black people, that there are Asian people. So, you know, Chinese people, Japanese people, Bengali people who are autistic getting up and talk about their experience. If a person who has more power, which is the white autistic community, if white autistics are unwilling to relinquish some of the power they have and their voice to give us space, then you're part of the problem, you're not part of the solution. And so the same things that you're arguing about in wider society, you're actually doing to people who are struggling more than you are. And so when we talk about intersectionality and intersections, I'm talking about me as a woman, as a Black individual, and as someone who's disabled. That's 3 intersections that I have, which means that I'm going to be more disadvantaged than somebody else, than somebody who is, you know, a white male who isn't disabled, or a white male who is disabled. I actually, I'm more disadvantaged, not due to education, not due to finances, but because of the way the structures are set up. And I witnessed this all the time. I see it, you know, people will be advertising conferences, and they'll be saying, please retweet. And I'll be saying, I always say, can you tell me how many Black and brown people you have invited to talk? Can you tell me how many Black and brown people you've invited to talk are autistic? and it goes very quiet, and they will always put the onus on us. Well, we asked people to kind of write in and tell us they wanted to do it. We tried to be diverse, but we didn't hear from anybody. Well, and then I always say to them, your keynote speaker who's white and autistic, did they have to contact you to talk, or did you contact them? And then it goes silent. And so I always try and flip it, you know. I always ask those uncomfortable questions and leave the person feeling uncomfortable, because actually, no, they openly went and pursued that individual because they've seen them at a conference before. So will you come and talk at my conference? So yeah, they come and talk at the conference, and then they tick a box. Oh, well, we've had an autistic lived experience talk. Well, no, because actually I've never heard a Black person talk about their experience. So as a society, we need to do better. As the white community, they need to do better. White autistics need to do better. You need to be helping us have a voice within the community. If we don't have voices, if we are not in important roles within this movement, then we can't uplift our community. We're not supposed to be leaving anybody behind, yet the autistic community they're leaving Black and brown autistics behind. And it's being done every day. I see it all the time, and it burns me out. And there's times where I have to take a step back because I could just spend my time ranting. And I don't want to do that. You know, I'm trying to be a mum, I'm trying to be a scholar, I'm trying to earn a living. And it's not happening because people don't invite you, because you're not important to them unless they come to you and say, oh, what's your opinion on something? So they want to take your information for free. They don't want to pay you for it. And we need to do better as a community. I'm showing you now some tags that are quite prevalent in the autism community. So all of these have been created by the white community, the white autistic community. So there's nothing there at all talking about supporting Black autistics. So you've got the jigsaw pieces, which is something autistic people, the majority of autistic people are against jigsaw and puzzle pieces, because what that's saying is there is something wrong with us, or there's a missing piece. And actually, when it comes to me and my loved ones, there's nothing wrong with us. We're autistic. We struggle in society because people aren't following the social model of disability. The structures and the framework of society make it difficult for us. But there's nothing wrong with me inherently or my children. So I take offense to the puzzle pieces. Light it up blue is something I used to do and felt really proud of until I started to kind of understand things better and realized it was connected to Autism Speaks. And again, a lot of people within the autism community is vehemently against Autism Speaks because it's another organization that doesn't have any voices of autistic people. When you look at the structure of Autism Speaks and you know, the people on the board, none of them are autistic. When you look at the percentage of money that goes towards the autism community to actual autistics to help them, it's very little. They promote ABA, which is applied behavioural, I can never even remember the last bit, analysis or something like that. But ABA is something that, it's things like forcing me to make eye contact, or forcing me to sit down, forcing me not to stim. And as a parent, as a Black autistic parent, I have to make sure my child masks his behaviours so that he can stay safe. That's very different to forcing him to act a certain way all the time because I don't want him to act autistic. And so I am very much against Autism Speaks, because they do not speak for me or anybody I know. And I would say the majority of people who you speak to who are autistic will tell you that. And also, we find that the autistic people who promote Autism Speaks, they've just not gotten to that part in their journey yet where they've been able to get more self-awareness and reflection. I've heard so many stories of people being really emotionally and harmed by Autism Speaks. So when you talk to autistic adults about Autism Speaks in America, you want to cry. It's not something that's as popular in the UK, but it's becoming more popular, and that frightens me, because I'm seeing within the Black community that lots of people are going down that route, and it's about behaviour modification. And again, that's almost like you're punishing who the child is, and we shouldn't be doing that. I'm an autistic woman. I'm mother of autistic children. I'm married to an autistic Black man. So there's 4 of us in the house who are autistic, and as an entire family, we are vehemently against ABA and behaviour modification. It's something I would never do to my children. And I am not judging people who do it, because I think when you start doing things like that, it's because you just don't understand. But if you take the time to talk to autistic adults who have had it done to them and who have grown up with it, if you talk to them and listen to them, you wouldn't want to do it anymore. And there's this real division between autistics and autistic parents. You have lots of autistic parents who say, you don't talk for me and my children, you don't understand what it's like because my child doesn't talk. Actually, there are lots of autistics out there who are non-verbal, who still communicate. Find somebody like that and communicate with them and ask them about their experiences. They will tell you that they are against it. There are people who will say, well, my child's low functioning and you're high functioning. You don't understand what it's like to be low functioning. There are ways of being able to communicate again with people who would have previously been diagnosed as low functioning, where you can get their lived experience. They are against Autism Speaks as well. You have autistic parents who say, nobody knows my child like I do. And with that, I say, you're absolutely right. Because if somebody came to me and tried to tell me how to parent my child, I would be really angry, because I love my children passionately and nobody knows my children like I do. But as parents, we also have to admit when we get it wrong, and when we know better, we're supposed to do better. So I would still advise those parents to please talk to autistic adults and find out what their experiences were and what they thought about themselves when ABA was being inflicted on them. And I promise you, you would stop doing ABA. You can see things like what we do now, we do hashtags like actually autistic, which the Black community struggle with sometimes, because again, it's been taken over mainly by the white autistic community. You've got light it up, so we don't like to light things up blue, we light it up gold or light it up red. Take off the mask. There are lots of hashtags that you can look for on Twitter and on Facebook, which then means that you can be communicating with autistic adults to find out about their lived experiences. And I would, like one of my closest friends now, when her son got a diagnosis, I was there to support her, and she says what she would recommend to anybody is, after a diagnosis, find somebody. Don't listen to a million voices, because then it's really hard. Find somebody who you trust, so that might take research, and just get some advice from them. Get a Twitter account. You don't have to have your face on there. You don't have to have your real name or your picture. Just get a Twitter account and start putting in things like actually autistic. and see and hear what these autistic adults are saying. And I think it will help you to, first of all, remember that your children will become adults, because for a long time I didn't even think that my kids, because they're my babies, I didn't even think of them as adults. And then one day I realized, oh my God, they're going to become adults. And I felt really panicked. And so it's important to talk to people who are adults to see the good and the bad in their lives. You know, what can I do to make sure my child doesn't struggle? You know, ask those questions. There will be people out there who really, really want to support you, who really want you to be the best parent you can be. But there has to be a willingness on the parent's part to listen. I think that's it. I can't think of anything else to say. I think I've ranted enough. So I hope you found it informative. I know that there's going to be, is there going to be a Q&A, Marguerite and Venessa? But I'd just like to have like, I'm from Sheffield, I'm from Yorkshire, and in Sheffield we always have cups of tea in our hands. And so because I've been talking, I've not got a cup of tea. So I'd like just a little break, if I could, to just make a cuppa.
I was typing saying, do you want a break? But you was ignoring my messages.
Oh, I didn't see. My screen's really weird. I can't move stuff around properly, so.
Don't worry, we'll do some pre-training for the next one, but yeah.
Oh, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah. But you've done well. I mean, if everybody wants to go get a cup of tea and come back, we can all just chat for a bit, because I know Dean's got to go because he's got to go somewhere, but well done. We can't hear you, Dean.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It was incredible.
Really thank you. I've not even been able to see people's faces, so I apologise for that. Thank you.
It's also wonderful to see Kayla from the US as well. And Kayla,